to episode 9. Woo, 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 yeah, you're jumping on the whoop whoop train as well. Wonderful. Today we're going to be looking into a topic that I'm really excited about. Like, I've enjoyed researching this so much. I've gone on some tours for it because I found it so fascinating, which I will be discussing in a special. This has been a really fascinating topic for me, so I am so excited. So today we are going to be looking at ghost witches, and in the future I hope to do a more detailed researched episode on the witch trials in general, but today we're just focusing on the idea of ghost witches. Just to cover my bases, what is your understanding of witches and ghosts and the witch trials in general?
I'm a bit confused when it does come to the topic of ghost witches. To me, it's a religion more than anything that gives you magical powers, so I don't really see how it's any different to a normal ghost having a religion. And my understanding of witch trials is that it was mainly just killing women and sometimes men. Who were just falsely and usually quite ridiculously accused of being witches, but they were just regular people.
Yeah, your understanding of the witch trials there is pretty damn accurate, and I can understand your confusion over the why are we classifying this one type of ghost. But I wanted to look into this because I wanted to see if there was any connections or links between them being accused witches in life and whether that would then have a stronger or a weaker correlation towards them being ghosts in the afterlife. And so I guess I'm going to kick off this episode with that question of, is there a strong correlation between your religion / occupation in your life and your afterlife? I do think it is really important to start out this episode though by stating that the majority of those involved in witch trials were innocent individuals, and they deserve a pardon for what was done to them.
100%, I agree.
Yes. Although punishment for malevolent magic has been in existence since laws began, the peak of what we as a collective society know as the witch trials really erupted around the 1300s and roughly concluded in the 18th century with the Dachau witch trials. However, that doesn't mean the witch trials aren't still happening around the world to this day. Witch trials of history we're discussing though are the ones that a lot of people know about in Europe, North America, and actually India.
Oh,
which
wow,
I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know there was a witch trial craze in India.
Yeah.
And to be fair, having researched this more deeply, it turns out that actually in some areas the female population was almost entirely wiped out.
That's wild. Where did that happen?
In this one place in Germany, there was like 80% of the female population was executed because of the witch trials, which way to like almost definitely ensure your non-continuation.
Insanity. You'd think after you'd get to like a certain point, you'd think surely not everyone can be a witch.
Yes. But nope, apparently 90% of them, they were like, yeah, off you toddle.
Mad.
Yeah. And speaking of mad, within the UK, around 500 people were executed in England and 3,000 to 4,000 in Scotland because of their supposed crimes of witchcraft.
Bloody hell, that's quite a startling figure shift, no?
Yes, that's really is.
500 to 4,000?
Yes.
Good lord.
And I think Scotland being such a crazy place for this to happen really speaks volumes about why this was going off at the time. So what is really important to understand is that at the time James VI of Scotland / James I of England was just coming onto the throne. There was a big change between going from Catholic religion, where witchcraft was sort of worked hand in hand, over to Protestant, where it was completely any form of it, full stop, was not allowed at all. And this is also reflected in then what happened in Wales as well. There were only 40 trials total in Wales, and only 5 people were executed because of witchcraft in Wales.
That's, again, a very big difference, but in a more positive way.
Yeah, and this was considerable because it shows that distinct difference between the nations, their relationships with witchcraft, the influence that the then king had on the country, as well as the religions of the time as well. So where England and Scotland were very much in the grip of switching religions, Wales was not really doing the same. The majority of Wales remained Catholic. There were some bits of Protestant belief, but most of the time people in Wales stuck with their beliefs because it was more isolated, because it was more rural. They didn't have to conform as much. The laws weren't the same here as they were in England and Scotland. One other thing that was really important is that the Bible wasn't even translated into Welsh until the 1500s.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so if this starts in the 1300s, there's like a good 200 years before the Bible even can contribute to this. So And in fact, according to Kelsey Rees, who undertook her masters into the Welsh witch trials, the word witch never even existed in Wales. So you've got these people who are going crazy about witchcraft and everything like that, and the Welsh people are just there like, what? I don't know that word. What do you want about? There are, of course, many reasons that lead to the witch trials across the world, but this is not the episode to break down into all of them. Generally, rule of thumb is that it was due to a lot of religious zeal, political envy, and really very much the true terror and suspicious fear of a world that was going through the Little Ice Age at the time. I know I said I would lay off the spooky questions, so I'm not gonna super spooky question you, Al, but I just wondered your thoughts. Do you think that it makes it more or less likely that witches would come back as ghosts after their death?
If we're going to say that ghosts are real, and I'm saying hypothetically,
yeah,
you'll never get me on tapes.
We'll go with the general rule of thumb, you don't believe in ghosts.
With the general rule of thumb, I don't believe in ghosts. Should ghosts be real, I still don't think, from what you've categorised as a witch ghost, it would make them more likely. Maybe in the sense that their deaths were incredibly traumatic, since that seems to be a theme, perhaps. However, you have stated previously that a absolutely massive majority of them were innocent people, so they would not be witches.
Yes.
They would not have been practicing witches in real life. They would have just been accused of a crime and then killed for that, and I don't think that that would influence the categorisation of the ghost they are. In a way, it's like accusing someone of murder, executing them for it. They would not be considered a murderer as a ghost.
Yeah, we wouldn't call them a murderer ghost.
No, you wouldn't.
Unless they murdered someone as a ghost.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really kind of important thing to look at when we're trying to differentiate.
Sure. So as usual, what we're going to do is we're going to circle out around the world before spiralling back into the UK and Wales, and then you can decide at the end whether you think the stories I've given you today prove that there are ghost witches, or if there's just ghosts who happened to be witches, supposedly. So like we mentioned with Wales, there is another place where witchcraft and the belief in Christianity is for the most part, like, they go hand in hand. You can do both. And that is the island of Siquijor in the Philippines, which is renowned for its inhabitants' mystical healing and shamanic healing abilities, and is referred to as the Island of Fire or the Island of Witches.
Wow, this is some quite powerful titles.
Yeah, aren't they just? And the Island of Fire name comes because apparently at a distance at night, the fireflies light up the entire island and make it look like it's on fire.
Wow.
Yeah, so, our firefly hunt? Let's go.
Sounds good.
So Ali_Axel mentioned on Reddit there are many different types of witches in the Philippines, and they're absolutely spot on right. There are loads, and each group has a distinctly different name and custom depending on the ethnic group's culture. So I'm not going to super go into it. If you want to do more research on that, have a look at the links below. For more information as well, though, I highly recommend checking out the Tabby Tabby podcast. I've linked it below again, as it specialises in Filipino mythology and folklore and was really informative in making this section. So the one type of witchcraft in the Philippines I do want to explore is the type of witch that practices barang, which is a very folkloric witchcraft. And everywhere I read about this, the fear that this specific type of witch brings out in people seemed very, very strong, very palpable, even through written articles. And I couldn't tell whether that is because it is still a thing, this type of witch is active, present tense, or if it's just so ingrained in folklore that it is terrifying. And this type of witch is called the Mambalarang. And it is... I don't want to talk about it because it's scaring me so much, but here we go. To me, this story, this type of witch feels and people talk about it almost like a ghost or an apparition, which is why I've included it to start off with.
Interesting.
Because it is our most to date one. There is still accounts of this happening, so it could be a real thing that people do. It might be wishful thinking on my part that this doesn't exist anymore. You decide at the end. The Mambalarang uses a specific type of insect, usually a centipede or something like that, and controls the insect's actions to create suffering, swarming, illness, and demise with their intended target by sending the insects to infest the victim via an open orifice.
Eesh. Yuck.
Yes, indeed. The victim would then suffer symptoms from said orifice that the bug has crawled into. The Mambabarang can find out information using these bugs. Once they've completed their task, they will return to the witch, and the witch's intentions are strictly malevolent. The insects can also lead to possession of objects, such as dolls, to spy on people, and to then degrade the soul of the object and the soul of their victim.
I really don't like that you said orifice and not mouth.
Yeah.
That gives too many hole openings for these insects to be involved in.
Yeah, any orifice.
Yeah. I can definitely see how having insects inside you would cause so much suffering, because yuck. I am really interested in what kind of information a bug living inside of you could kind of glean, though, from being inside of you. Maybe if the person's overdue a colonoscopy appointment, perhaps. But to me, it kind of sounds a bit like parasites.
Yeah.
And that it's an attempted explanation for why some people get infected with parasites.
It could be. I would agree with you, except for the fact that it could be a centipede. Because I'm just imagining a centipede crawling out of your nose and then scuttling. What?
Yeah.
Nope. Okay, I respectfully to Mambabarangs. I want to move on now, thank you. They freak me out.
Fair enough.
Coming a little bit closer to home, I wanted to discuss a case from Kilkenny in Ireland. And this is a story of Dame Alice Kyteler. And she is one of the earlier witch trials taking place in 1342. I think she's a remarkable woman. She had 4 husbands, she was a business owner, she was interested in law and things like that. 3 out of 4 of the husbands died under mysterious circumstances. And her 4th husband began to experience a wasting disease, but by this point, his children were already excluded from his will, meaning it would all go to her. She had set herself up. She was accused of poisoning and witchcraft and put to trial, but was able to flee because of her high connections, and not to glorify a potential murderer, but way to girl boss gatekeep.
I mean, I wouldn't say, remarkable and girl boss necessarily attached in this scenario.
I mean, she was a woman, and she was a boss. She was born in a house that she then turned into an inn, which at the time period for a woman, snaps.
Hey girlie, way to commit heinous moral crime. Big up, love seeing women in power.
Pretty much, yeah. So, Kyteler was never heard from again after her trial, so no one has any idea what happened to her. However, there are 2 ghosts in Kilkenny attached to this story. The first one belongs to her inn, the Kyteler Inn, which is where she set up the inn in 1324. When the mob tried to come for Alice to take her to her death because of witchcraft, she'd actually got off of being on trial a couple of times, and they were like, not this time, we're getting you. She fled after this mob, and the mob wasn't satisfied with nothing, so they decided to take her maid instead, Petronella of Meath.
Wow, sounds like the mob and the poisonous suck in this circumstance.
And Petronella was burnt at the stake for hearsay and witchcraft.
That's so rough. She hadn't done anything.
No, she hadn't. And it is said that Petronella still haunts the Kyteler Inn. We could go there if you wanted as well.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, apparently it's a really fun, lively pub. Yeah.
Sounds interesting.
The second ghost attached to this is Alice herself, and she is supposed to haunt St. Canice's Cathedral by the window on the western wall. And there is an account of someone in that cathedral who went near that window and suddenly was filled with a huge feeling of dread and misery, and then as soon as she took 3 steps back, it was gone.
Wow.
Yeah. What's really interesting about this as well is that her son was also implicated in the trial for witchcraft, and he was punished by being instructed to repair part of the roof of St. Canice's Cathedral.
Well, hang on a minute, that doesn't sound fair at all. You've got a maid who had nothing to do with it being burnt at the stake.
Yep.
And little lad of poisoneer girl boss herself is being asked to fix a roof.
He went on to be a mayor.
Well, that's really not fair.
No, it's really not. It's ridiculous. But yeah, so that's... The good news is that Petronella's daughter did also escape with Alice. I guess is the only...
Well, Alice should have taken... Petronella.
Yeah, agreed. It seems to me that there is a connection likely between Alice and this cathedral. It also appears like that cathedral would have been the closest Catholic one at that period of time, so it might have been that she got married or even had her son's baptism there. Without going to Ireland and physically looking through the archives, I couldn't confirm this because it is a very old story too. But it does make sense to me then that she would haunt this location. So maybe she was completely innocent and is looking for her lord to accept her and she never did anything and that's why she feels wronged. Or maybe she's at the church because she feels bad and wants to be forgiven.
I mean, most stories have an element of truth to them. It's what makes them believable. Linking historical events to a supernatural occurrence doesn't make them true. It just makes it a little bit more easier for the normal person to swallow.
This is most of my evidence.
Well, also, out of everyone who died in the witch trials, I feel like someone who killed 4 out of 4 husbands. Not to say that not to say that I agree with capital punishment, but I think that someone who's killed 4 out of 4 husbands is probably a little bit more deserving than the poor people who just did nothing. And ain't that just the way of the world?
Well, I can see what you're saying, and I guess if she did kill her husbands, then a punishment is more deserving than, say, for example, my next case. Mm-hmm. Agnes Sampson, and she was the first witch trial in Scotland and was responsible for kicking off the witch trials in Scotland. And this one took place in North Berwick in 1591. Agnes was a midwife. That was her crime.
Damn women, ensuring safe childbirth.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure midwives were actually one of the more accused occupations.
Yes. And that was mostly because they knew herbs, they knew how to deal with women in very difficult points in their lives. Men were often kept out of birthing rooms, and what's really important to note as well is that a lot of the time people trusted wise folk and like soothsayers and local people more than they did doctors. Doctors were incredibly expensive and couldn't often do a lot, whereas these other people who knew the herbs of the land, they knew these people, they'd probably grown up with them, were really, really trusted. This is why I think a lot of the witch trials went down, is because these women and some men who knew their way around herbs and bodies from experience got caught up with more powerful men in the area who were intimidated by their independence and power, and therefore couldn't think of any reason why these women might be so amazing at what they did other than they've made a deal with the devil.
Right.
Agnes, unfortunately, was seen as everything that was wrong with a woman. She was independent, she was a widow, she had 5 children and she managed to make a living. She had a lot of knowledge on herb law that she'd learnt from one of her family members, and she was trusted within the community. So for the men of that period of time, she was a threat. This led to her death, where she was shaved, starved and tortured in front of groups of men before she finally confessed. And I put confession in
air quotes.
Yeah,
quite right.
And what proved that she was a witch to these men was the discovery of a witch mark. Do you know what a witch mark is?
I think in the context of bodies it refers to a birthmark or freckle or mole.
Yep.
I think it's maybe supposed to be a little bit more complex, but witchfinders would grasp at anything to call someone a witch. Mm-hmm. And I think in the instances these marks were supposed to signify where like the devil has suckled from them or something.
Absolutely, yes. And they would often take a long needle and poke it into said mark. If there was no pain, then that proved that it was an area that the devil had touched the woman at.
Yeah.
But it was incredibly exposing to the women of the time, and just a disgusting practice that they were essentially tortured into.
Yeah, I was going to say, to be honest, I bet that the women wished all they had to do was strip and, But no, it was always much, much worse.
Mm-hmm. One of the amazing things that has come out of this trial is that we actually have a record of one of the prayers that Agnes would issue during her healing sessions. And I'm going to play a recording of it for you that has been beautifully acted out, and you can tell me what you think.
All kinds of evils that ever may be, in Christ's name I conjure you. I conjure you both more and less, with all the virtues of the Mass, and just so, by the nails so, that nailed Jesus and not more, and just so by the same blood that flowed over the ruthless wood, out of the flesh and out of the bone, and in the earth and in the stone, I conjure ye in God's name.
So I think it sounds like a prayer. It doesn't sound any different to, other kind of prayers I've heard. I think all prayers are a bit vaguely creepy in a
Sure.
way. Like, not in a disrespectful kind of way, but they're never particularly nice. It makes me think back to like Lord's Prayer and that sort of thing. In my mind, it's a very similar praxis.
And what I think is really interesting about this specific one is that one of the 53 counts brought against her was that she was denying Christ in the church, but yet in this prayer she's literally calling on the power of Jesus.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I also just want to point out how incredible it is to have written verbatim text from a woman from this time period when women were seen as very powerless. It's an incredibly rare and wonderful thing to have, so it brings me a lot of joy to be able to bring her beliefs and work back to light. Agnes was innocent, and I am going to leave that statement there because this whole topic makes me incredibly frustrated and angry. She did not deserve what happened to her.
No, it doesn't sound like it at all.
No. And Agnes's ghost is now said to haunt Holyrood House Palace, where she was taken and tortured for days before her eventual execution. It is said now that she is the most regularly seen ghost in that house, as most recently as 2014, when a maintenance man claimed to see a bald, naked and injured woman limping towards him with her arms outstretched. He screamed and the ghost fled.
I mean, if he was a maintenance man at the house, he probably would have been familiar with the story of a haunting, so the fact that he described that sort of visit isn't shocking if he would have been familiar with that tale. I don't think that necessarily adds any amount of evidence, necessarily.
Sure. For me, I think it's a really interesting one, just because you don't actually hear a lot of shaved-headed, bald, naked women ghosts, and I just think the fact that we know for a fact that her hair was shaved and she was stripped naked repeatedly is a really interesting point, because if I was a ghost, the last thing I would want would to be exposed in that way in my afterlife, in the most vulnerable position I'd ever been in.
No, I agree. I mean, it could also be that if she were in ghost form, she might be choosing to stay in that state as a reminder of crimes that had been committed against her, to torment the tormentors, in a way.
Yeah, it could be. So, circling back onto Wales. Now, this probably makes a lot of sense to me, honestly, but there are very few documented witch trials in Wales, and therefore there are very few reported ghost witches.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I did look into each different official witch trial case where someone was executed, all 5 of them, and although there are definitely ghosts linked to those locations, there's nothing that suggests it's the specific ones that were executed because of witchcraft. There are many ghosts in these places, but they're also in like courthouses where lots of people would have been put to death. So I can't confirm or deny that they are the ghosts. However, one thing that I do think is really interesting is that all 5 of these cases were in North Wales. However, the paranormal database did come through with some Welsh examples, but these are so far back in history that really I think they're more legends than actual cases, so I'm just going to run through them just for sake of here's the information. Firstly, there is the Witch of Holywell at Basingwork Abbey. I really struggled with this one because there are multiple locations referenced in the sighting that aren't actually near each other. The story goes that an abbot of Basingwork asked God to stop a witch who could also turn into a werewolf, and he asked God to help him stop her from killing people. Heaven did this by trapping her into a wolf form, and she was then killed by King Henry II's hunting party. What's really interesting about this is there are a lot of big cat sightings by Basingwork Abbey as well, so maybe the witch is wandering around still as a werewolf.
So you're saying that a werewolf's being confused for a big cat?
Yes.
But a sheep being confused for a big cat is outlandish. But you've gone back on that since, so...
Well, yeah.
I mean, it's nonsense at the end of the day, but...
The whole story is nonsense the more I looked into it, so I found quite a few holes. By stating that it was Henry II's hunting party, we can date this to 1154 to 1189, which is interesting because the majority of the monks didn't actually live at Basingwork Abbey. They lived in a slightly different location until the 13th century, so timings are a bit off there. Longdendale is nowhere near Basingwork. However, the monks at Basingwork did have land by Glossop, and there is a forest next to there called Longdendale. So my theory is that this is a mislisting / location. The witch / werewolf sighting happened at Longdendale, not Basingwork. It happened to be that the Basingwork abbot was there to do that blessing. So I think that realistically this needs to be removed from anything to do with Wales and just put to Longdendale instead.
Fair enough. Maybe it could just be put in a bin because there's no chance that a witch is turning into a werewolf.
Okay. The next one I have for you is Canrig Butt. I think it's pronounced that way. The story here goes that there is a witch who lived in a cave by Lambaris. She was a cannibal who specialised in the brains of children. A criminal was tasked with killing her in exchange for his life and freedom, and so he made his way to the cave, which is still there, and he described the witch's eyes as bright red before he cut off her head, and as the head tumbled down the path, he could still see the eyes flashing red.
I mean, well, cannibalism isn't too outlandish of a concept, really.
No.
It's happened in human history. We know it's happened in human history. In fact, there are some pretty fat books written about cannibalism in human history, even some probably about UK cannibalism specifically. You know.
Yeah, I guess. I'm not here for that. I think it was an animal.
I mean, depending on what time period in history it's happened, if wolves were still in the UK at that time, then yeah, absolutely. But even then, I haven't really heard of wolves cracking open children's heads and having a good old munch on the brains specifically.
Fair.
That seems like a very weird, specific, human, messed up kind of detail.
Fair enough. I think that's a pretty common detail when it comes to animals, though. So I'm gonna... Hey, it could be a hellhound.
Crunch.
Crunch, 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 crunch. So here's the thing. Because this legend is told via word of mouth, there was not a lot to corroborate it other than an entry from our friend, Wirt Sykes.
He's got such a cool name.
He does. In his book, British Goblins, Welsh Folklore, Fairy Mythology, Legends and Traditions. I wonder really if this story originates from him and maybe the story is as fantastical as his name is.
And perhaps, if it's a word-of-mouth story, then there's no evidence for it either way.
Yeah, it's very much a case of he said he was told this by a local, but there's no trace of it pre-1880.
Right.
So. And my final one that I'm going to tell you about is the Gwrach-y Rabin, who is supposedly a winged witch that curses anyone who stays overnight in the ruins of Pennard Castle. This castle also has ties to the Fae, but apparently was built by a sorcerer who summoned the witch in order to protect him from the Norman invaders. Cool story. Couple of problems. The mention of the Normans gives a bit of a time period on this. The castle was thought to have been built in the 12th century, but the Normans attacked and conquered South Wales by 1095, so...
Bit of a time discrepancy.
A little bit, yeah. So safe to say this story is probably rubbish. However, I'm totally down for going out and camping in the ruins for a night if you're up for it.
Is there a shower block?
No.
Yeah, I'm really more of a, plumbing kind of camper.
There's the beach.
That's not going to help.
So, I will just throw in one little story because it's literally a sentence. There is supposed to be a witch in Lanhilleth named Joan White, last seen in 2004 in an oblong four-corner hat, tatty clothes and an apron. But I couldn't find any records of a woman named this before 1891, and there's no records of anyone being accused officially of witchcraft in Wales by that name.
Okay, so they just saw someone in a pointy hat.
Pretty much. And did you know that the classic witch costume of that conical hat, the clothes, is actually based on traditional Welsh dress?
Wow, I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah. One thing that I thought was fascinating when I was researching this was that it completely disproved my personal beliefs at the onset. Originally I thought there would be tons of ghost witches due to my theory about bad vibes equal more ghosts, but actually I seem to have found the opposite. I do have theories on this though. My first one is that because the majority of the witch trial victims were innocent, they're not going to stick around, they're going to enjoy the afterlife.
I mean, they might have stuck around if it's a traumatic, agonising death, or they might be feeling particularly vengeful or spiteful against the people who put them to death prematurely when they had done nothing wrong, if ghosts were a thing.
Yeah. My second one is ain't no ghosts of evil witches because they're all in hell. They made deals with the devil and therefore that's where they've gone.
Yeah, I haven't got anything to say about that one because, yeah, I don't know anything about making pacts with the devil.
Me neither, but it's a theory. Finally, and this is a theory that has been discussed by Yvette Fielding of the famous Most Haunted. Could it be that particularly powerful witches in an area are able to harness the souls of other spirits in order to make themselves more powerful? So essentially, Big Mama Witch sucks in all the little baby witches to make herself more powerful, and that's why there's fewer ghost witches.
Is there any evidence at all, or is this just completely unfounded?
Well, she did try and ask one of the Pendle witches about this.
No. Don't tell me that the evidence for this is, I spoke to a ghost, and the ghost told me yes.
Well, tell you what, we'll watch the episode together, and you can see what you make of it.
You're giggling, which means that that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
dear. No.
It's a theory.
It shouldn't be. That's rubbish.
But those are my 3 theories. Please feel free to sound off in the comments which one you think it is. I guess there's also theory number 4 of ghosts aren't real, it's all made up.
Yes, that's got my vote.
So that is... Do you have any questions? Anything you want to know about?
There was a question on Reddit asking what a ghost witch was. But I think you clarified that point earlier when you talked about how you're categorising it based on people who were practising witchcraft or accused of being a witch. So I think that was the only burning question that I had as well, so I'm glad that was answered.
Yeah, I do think that we probably can't really classify a ghost as a witch ghost any more than we can a butcher ghost or a candlemaker ghost and things like that. I was so surprised there weren't more cases of witches connected to the witch trials. And I know I have skipped over some, but yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's all stories, so...
So that is Ghost Witches. Hopefully I've done the topic justice, and I do hope to go more into this in detail later if there is call for it. So if this episode has wetted your whistle for this topic, please let us know in the comments, so I know it's not just me that's obsessed with ghosts and witches and stuff. As always, if you have any stories to share or spot a video that you think might be of interest, tag us on Instagram or Reddit, #Sitnos, SITNOS, and you can also email us at scaredinthenameofscience@gmail.com.
As always, thanks for listening, guys, or watching.
Or both. Thank you.
Thanks.